An alien world. Stories in the past had spoken of places that were unlike anything ponies should ever see. Now I was standing in one of them. The Philadelphia crater expanded ahead of me, a colossal scar upon the planet itself that would no doubt remain as a painful reminder longer than any picture I could ever draw. I had imagined it as a perfect circle, but really, that wasn't quite true. Tougher areas of rock or buildings had reflected the shockwave or fire just enough to slow its progress. As such, the colossal border stretching in all directions was more like the ragged edge of an irregular cliffside than a geometric shape. There was no beauty here, only a mercilessly indiscriminate and vibrant horror. The entire thing had blown the earth away so harshly that to walk to the middle would seemingly take some pony a significant height below the usually flat surface of Philadelphia. A serrated and ruin-pocketed surface flowed down each of the slopes from the sides in ways I could never have imagined. Smooth, glass-like surfaces were in my mind, but the truth was that there was wreckage, collapsed housing that had fallen below the earth, and even small hills from chunks of rock too hard or too solid to actually be shifted by the balefire. It was almost like a small war zone contained in a weird-shaped bowl. No, there was nothing here but wretched and twisted devastation curled into its most heinous shapes. No wonder Red-Eye was still sending slaves in. To hunt through all that refuse and loose earth for radioactive material would take decades to complete. Even as I stared down from the massive piles of earth that surrounded the entire crater, I began to realize how easy it would be to get lost in that skeletal jungle of rock and metal. "You know where we're going, Brimstone?" The warlord had been standing, watching into the crater himself. We'd had to get by Red-Eye's defenses around the crater by claiming we were on a work detail. I had still been depressed and hurt by the roll call earlier enough that the guards believed our story that I had been sentenced here for stealing. As such, we'd been lumped with large saddlebags, each that they used for the materials. I had wondered about the defenses. Why would they want to stop some pony going in? Then I'd noticed the guns had pointed inwards, and suddenly the dangers in here made perfect sense.
"The Rot's old lab should be near the rough outskirts. We shouldn't need to go in too deep. He said to look for an angular metal shaft that would probably still have survived at that depth. Keep your eyes peeled, Murk."
Brimstone was allowing me the freedom of working together here. Even he had been shaken by the sight of the direct impact zone that ended this portion of the world. Alongside us we saw ponies retching and coughing with radiation sickness that even outstripped my own, wandering into the crater for their work. They almost looked ghoul-like, for their very flesh seemed to sag, and hair was coming off in patches. Very quickly I realized how glad I was Weathervane had treated me before leaving, and for his Radex. According to him, I'd have about half an hour before I started to feel it, hopefully enough time to get back to him. Approaching an hour would be a serious risk, assuming I didn't encounter any higher radiation areas in the process.
"Come along, Murk. No sense in hanging around with this much red activity in the air."
He clambered over the earthworks and dropped down the slope with the rugged capabilities of a pony that was born to the wasteland's troubles. My own descent, delayed until I could push myself to take that last step, was somewhat less capable as I hopped, floundered, fell, and promptly rolled down the remainder before coming to a halt upside down, half buried in the earth. It was dry and warm, like a heavy sand with absolutely no real tension around me. I struggled not to breathe as I tried to pull my head and front hooves from the ground. Mumbling and trying to shout for help, I ended up just making something more akin to while waggling my rear legs around. Even by my standards, this wasn't particularly dignified. A quick tug on my tail ripped me free as I dangled in front of Brimstone, my tail in his mouth. Swinging back and forth like a pendulum, gasping for air and spitting out mounds of foul-tasting dry dirt, I eventually sighed as I grasped how hard this was going to be. There was absolutely no way to move other than to plow through the loose earth that had been chopped up by balefire and shockwave. Perhaps if I could... Yark! He dropped me. Landing sideways, I flailed around until I managed to force myself up. No wonder so many ponies got irradiated here. Even aside from the ambience, the loose earth kicked up in your face, nose, and eyes every step you had to take. I'd heard of such an effect after large explosions, like a loose earth problem. But how did the ground remain this way after 200 years? Were mega spells so powerful that they had corrupted the ground to never truly heal on its own? It wouldn't surprise me. After all, that's what had happened to Weathervane. We staggered on, Brimstone's heavy hooves not finding good purchase on the very unstable ground. Very quickly I felt my stomach twist. Fear clenched my heart as thoughts of the radiation piercing through my Radix-based resistance entered my mind. They were quelled as it rumbled. Malnourishment, that old hateful presence across my entire life, was still with me. It dawned that I still hadn't eaten a thing since Protégé's apple stew gift, other than drinking foul rat away. A substance I suspected was dehydrating me even more if my dry and cracked lips had anything to do with it. I could feel my limbs trembling lightly from the hunger. That ever-present feeling that you never got used to as a slave, of never truly having enough food in you to feel full or properly fueled. Really, the only thing keeping it from affecting me too badly was the greater threats ahead of me in my mind. Shaking my head harshly, I looked around to try and take my thoughts off my aching belly. Around me, I saw many of the regulars to the crater were wearing planks of wood on their hooves to spread out the weight. Those without were, like us, their hooves disappearing up to the knee, or, in my case, torso, every step, and kicking up dust and earth everywhere. The entire operation was truly grim. Scrambling through fallen houses on their sides and under mounds of loose earth, they sought out scraps of valuables to throw into their saddlebags. I could see the mouths of the earth ponies were raw and scarred from the ragged edges they had to dig and scramble for. Unicorns lazily levitated things with little real power. Every few seconds, I heard some ponies shouting, either in a fight over who found what, or in a panic over some injury. The sound echoed in the lonely maze of ruin that towered above me on every side. I had been a slave in some horrible places. I had been an illiterate librarian assistant. I had pulled carts and tugged scrap. I had been a forced laborer servant to a trader. I'd farmed rocks. But this was the most dreary and depressing sight I had ever witnessed. Half skipping and half almost swimming, I kept up with Brim as best I could after snapping my goggles across my eyes. Wicked Slit had some weird ways, but she clearly knew a comfy set when she found one. At least in my service they'd keep all this loose earth from my eyes, especially what was kicked up by Brimstone Blitz. His massive presence kept the more opportunistic hunters at bay as we headed for the location Brim had been told of. He had seen it from the lip of the crater already after we'd climbed up the refuse pile. A single flagpole, still oddly standing among all of the ruin, or perhaps raised again afterwards by the most determined flag-bearer in history. No pony would think anything of it but for an oddity, but according to Weathervane, if we looked for a small formation of little rocks, the entrance would be nearby as a hidden underground metal shaft. It seemed close. I really hoped we could just poke our heads in, grab what we could near the door, and then gallop off. We were about 5 minutes in on my 30-minute limit before Radix would begin to wear off, and I'd start to suffer at a vastly increased rate. That thought still clenched at my heart. Given a moment of hesitation, I might lose my nerve and gallop for the exit. What was I doing here? Brimstone probably didn't really need my help, and I still had Barb's offer, right? But I couldn't. I'd made my stand. I was going to put my hopes in these ponies, and just pray something worthwhile might come of finding some allies. The fear of failure was so great in me that even one slip might convince me that it wasn't even worth ever trying again. I was hanging on to the cliff edge with one hoof here, relying on finding some help to pull me out of it again. As such, I was fearing everything that might aid in that failure, and of course, chief among it was the radiation. In a way, it was somewhat creepy. I couldn't see the radiation. I couldn't feel it right now either. Only through knowing was I aware of the malignant, magical aftermath accumulating in my body from the crater. I needed to take my mind off it. Get my mind off it all. Perhaps Brimstone would be open to conversation? Truly, I had reached the end of things available to help distract me if that was my option. Brimstone?
Aye?
Well, it was a start. When we first met, I thought you were escaping. Did you honestly just run back to your pen? To Protégé?
Aye.
It wasn't much, but anything for now to build some conversation to stop my imagination running rampant in this place was good. Or to stop it settling on my lungs. Or my eyes. What was your clan like, anyway? I'm sorry, but I hadn't heard of it.
You probably didn't. You were kept sheltered.
Didn't feel like it. Brimstone snorted, looking around briefly. The look frightened me, but at least he was talking now.
Whatever. There were about 100 of us, one of the biggest single clans. Some called us a gang or a war band, but we chose the term clan. It speaks of a proper bred group rather than just a motley collection, for we only took in the toughest around. Caravan guards used to pay us in advance so they knew they could promise safe passage to their clients. Any pony who wanted to join had to survive a 10-minute beating from the others. Sometimes I joined in. Those ones never made it, other than one. Reputation enough that other raiders paid us tribute just to not steamroll them. So we really had another 5 or so groups out there that I put chiefs in control of. Because of our size, we often split up. Spread the misery around, you know.
Okay, lots of talking. I was surprised as we trotted along. Perhaps this place was getting to the big stoic raider. I'd never get used to thinking of him as good or bad. He just seemed to drift too easily without, presumably, glimmerlight around to guide him. Sometimes he felt like a noble redeemer, others like an unstable mountain of carnage ready to unleash its rage on any pony that rubbed him the wrong way. Yet that last line had almost sounded self-demeaning. You had other leaders then?
My big 4, the toughest or nastiest ones in the entire clan except me. 3 of them are in here actually. 2 of them went to the pit. The 3rd is a nasty piece of work called Barb, who took over the clan after I gave it up. He won't dare confront me directly, though. He knows what would happen. But back in the day, I sent them places. They went and did the job, got the loot, and brought back any prisoners to our home camp. We hunted other raiders just to prove we were better. Sometimes we all got together just to scare the shit out of the wasteland in some big attack. Took Ponyville that way. Most of the guards just galloped off the moment they saw us.
I saw a nostalgic grin spread onto his face. Perhaps this wasn't a good idea to go poking around.
Pity for them, Barb and his lot had their retreat cut off. He always was good at that sort of thing. It's why I made him one of the big 4. Not one of the Ponyville settlers survived that day. We made sure of it. An example. Don't fuck with the great warlord Brimstone. Any pony who goes to Ponyville now, he'll see my legacy.
There was something disturbing about hearing this from his own mouth. That last sentence had sounded suddenly regretful amongst what else had sounded like a boast. He stopped. That same melancholy seemed to overtake him briefly.
Sometimes I wonder how many I killed as a warlord. How many I sold into these pits to die under Red Eye before he betrayed us at the handover and took us too. How many families curse our name and weep at night for their lost ones. How many colts and fillies growing up without parents because of what we did. How many only growing up because of what we did.
Brimstone stopped, turning toward me. It looked like he was having trouble knowing how to emote something.
Makes you wonder what history will see of us. Will they remember the warlord or the repenter? Or just... fuck it.
He stomped off ahead of me with a manner that implied I was not to follow or go too close to him. Somehow I got the feeling I'd stumbled on a side of him I shouldn't have seen. I'd seen him angry plenty of times. I'd seen him show regret or a more melancholic side before, too. But that time, he He had honestly just seemed, well, upset.
Get away! This is my scavenge spot. I find stuff here, so you go away! Go away!
We had come to the flagpole after 10 minutes of labored trotting, only to find a scavenging unicorn mare poking around. I couldn't even tell her mane's color. It was too dirty on the few strands still remaining from weeks of radiation poisoning. Her bony-looking pink body only seemed to be in a worse state, while her cutie mark of some meat on a stick was almost obscured by scars. The rest was covered in rough fabric bandages over festering wounds. She was waving a chunk of rebar at Brimstone after he had entered, her eyes full of panic and seemingly well prepared to attack out of sheer desperation. Brimstone was less than subtle about how he dealt with the problem.
Move away now, or that same rebar will cave in your head. I've no time for this.
I could see this turning violent very quickly. Even I could see the mare wasn't thinking straight. She was just terrified. I knew what it was like to live under the ticking clock of rad poisoning. Hastily, I moved toward Brimstone. His mood had been slowly turning from regret to anger. Whether at himself or the situation with Glimmer, I couldn't tell.
Look, let me talk to...
I said move, mare!
She shook her head, body shivering and eyes far too wide.
I said go away. This is my place. It has the scrap I need. I'm almost done my months. Just 2 more weeks, I think. No pony has ever done it. I think I can. I know who you are. So go away, warlord. You brought me in here. You won't take my work for freedom away from me. Get back!
I moved over, hopping onto my rear legs and placing my front two on Brim's upper front leg to get his attention.
She's just scared, Brim. We don't have to.
Enough of this!
The air was knocked clean out of me as he swept me to the side roughly and charged forward. The rebar was grabbed in his teeth as I saw him barrel into the mare and knock her behind the collapsed wall out of my sight. I heard her shrieking until his war cry drowned her out. I huddled into a corner of the ruins, trying to get my lungs to work properly again. Brimstone emerged, spitting the bloody rebar out and motioning to me that the door was inside, leaving a moaning sound behind him. I could see the wild look in his eyes, and his entire body trembled with a dying frenzy. Behind him, the mare fled, if such a word could apply. She was limping horribly, and holding her frayed and now bloodied clothing to the side of her head. Any disagreement I had with his method here would go unvoiced. I never wanted that anger directed at me. It took a lot of willpower for me to get up and follow him to the hidden door half buried in the ground. It was disguised as an old radiator, just as Weathervane had explained to Brimstone. I kept my eyes averted, not wanting to see the sight of the poor mare as she wailed and tried to gather up what she could before unsteadily fleeing into the smog.
Fucking damn it. Too much like before. I can't lose you.
It was barely a whisper, but I heard it clearly. It was becoming apparent to me just how badly this situation was affecting the big raider, knowing that the only savior to his life's direction was at death's door, and he was so far away from her. In a way, I could relate. Both of us were after the same thing, albeit from different approaches. Something to prove we were who we wanted to be, not who we started as. Glancing at the thick darkness ahead of us in the metallic corridor, I flicked on the faulty light of the pit-buck and cast it around the entrance. I wasn't terrified of the dark, rather more that dark could contain something, such as whatever it was Red Eye was worried about coming out of the crater. But right now, I was too afraid of the raider behind me to even consider hesitating in the job. Instead, I pulled off my goggles and left them around my forehead to see better, before advancing past the doorway and being struck by just how quiet everything suddenly got in here. Inside was what amounted to a bunker entrance. An empty guard booth sat to one side behind thick glass. I could still see their hat sitting on the chair. Beyond that, perforated metal stairs led down underground past an already open cage gate. Clearly, this was a larger complex than we had been told of. Particles of dust floated in the air from the still atmosphere, but somehow I got the impression it was just as contaminated as outside. We were 15 minutes in, This had to be quick. The hooves of my companion clanging off the mesh stairs hardly let the silence be unbroken, so I took the opportunity to move ahead a little and try to stick to the shadows. It gave him some space to think, and kept me away from that noise. But the further down I went, the more I was beginning to realize that this stairwell was not ending. It just kept going deeper. The entire stairway was just one long, cramped way down, with shutters every so often that seemed to have been wedged up. The steel frames, deep shadows, and flickering light of my pit-buck didn't do much to make it seem anything but an intimidating stairway into the underbelly of the crater, into the heart of the balefire. I tried to push such imaginary thoughts from my head, but this place was hidden away for years, even from Red-Eye. I couldn't help but feel like I had stepped into something distinctly not in Philadelphia. Feeling the stairs creak and occasionally bend below me, I wondered what the standards of this place's construction were. After all, it had survived relatively intact under the very sight of the megaspell. 10 feet further, and the darkness gave way to something different to my right. A doorway. There was one door, at least on this descent. It looked like a small guard post intended into the right-hand side wall. If I had to guess, maybe somewhere to go if not on door duty above? I waved to Brim before disappearing into it. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't much. A small desk, smashed terminal on it, beside a lot of strewn papers and small relics of whatever guard used to spend his days sitting away down here. Given the relatively minimal security, I imagined the building that this had once existed under was the real place that would have kept ponies out. After all, this entrance used to be a good 40 feet below ground until the balefire wiped it all away. Kept ponies out, I wondered. Or in. I sifted through the guard's belongings. A rusted old toaster had been smashed on the floor, and the sink above it gave out only a thick brown goop. Nothing really made sense to my eyes. All written notes and documents beyond my ability to read. With his heavy tread, I saw Brimstone's head poke in through the doorway to what I now knew was likely a common room or shared office space. Briefly, I contemplated asking Brimstone what, if any, of the documents said, but at that moment I doubted what he needed was me badgering him to read what this old skeleton's groceries were. Wait, skeleton? I flipped. I hadn't even noticed him, but letting out a terrified yelp, I made a dive over the desk. The pony skeleton had been dumped in the corner, bones cracked and lying around the main body. Brimstone just grumbled at my reaction, before wandering around to have a look himself. He knocked it with a hoof, snorting.
No, this just ain't right.
I hate skeletons.
I was whining and I didn't care.
The past, it's just horrible to think about. I don't like being reminded of it all. I see him or her, and then I see a few things on a desk, and I can't help putting it all together. These ponies died as they saw their world come apart around them.
Brimstone glared briefly, raising an eyebrow, and poked at the desk, before rotating a small picture. Craning over the furniture, I had a look myself. On it was a montage of 6 images stapled together. Each showed a buck standing with a toothy grin beside a mare. Weren't those the same ones on the banners in the mall? Yes, they were. Pinky was there, her eyes staring at an odd angle out of the frame. They were looking right at me from the way Brimstone was holding it. I shivered at the uncanny coincidence, before he pulled her glaring eyes away. I could swear they followed me as the angle changed.
You want the past? This is it. This idiot believed in them. But from all I've heard, discovered, and seen over the decades, they were the idiots who messed it all up. Put their hooves in places they shouldn't. Made things that never should be. And meddled in magic and technology ponies never should have touched. I don't know the details. Few ponies do. But at the end of the day, it was under their guidance and leadership that the world ended. Too optimistic. Too stupid. The world wasn't the perfect paradise you see, Merc. These ponies ruined it with their so-called ministries.
I peered at the others. One was clearly the rainbow dash that Weathervane had mentioned, judging by her mane. I saw the medical poster one too. She looked surprised at the buck grinning for a photo with her. How could she have caused anything? I surmised that perhaps the others just did things. Pinky, probably. That yellow and pink one was too nice-looking to do anything. I was sure of it. That buck really loved them, didn't he?
Foolish idiot, but that isn't him lying there.
His back hoof tapped the skeleton, nudging the skull to fall to the floor. I winced before turning back to the raider. He nodded at the skeleton.
That's fresh. No cobwebs, no mold. Some pony died down here within a week or so. Wasn't rat poisoning before you go on that theory.
I blinked as he wandered out of the room. Why? What tells you that?
Rat poisoning doesn't crack your bones in two for marrow, Mark.
I felt every hair on my neck stand on end as the shattered leg bones suddenly made horrifying sense. Backing away into the corridor, I averted my eyes and shook as I leaned on the wall. I might have cried for them, but my attention was instead drawn to an all-too-familiar sound. Beep! I was getting used to it. I didn't jump or even squeal from the sudden noise. Well, perhaps a little hop. And maybe a squeak. Beep! Brimstone's harsh glance looked accusingly at me as my pitbuck began to blip and beep. I'd turned off the sound. How on Equestria had that dial turned around again? Was it on automatic? Sighing, I turned it back down to a level that only I might hear what the apparent automated audio diary had to say.
Sundial scores! Sorry, I wanted to try opening one of these things a little excitedly. Oh boy, is that gonna sound embarrassing when I listen back to it or what?
I couldn't stifle a giggle. After today, after all that had happened in my life since the pit, I couldn't help but enjoy Sundial's more innocent times. His worries that someone might laugh at something he said? What a world when that was your real concern. Not like mine.
So, basically, yeah, I asked her.
Oh! I gasped slightly, feeling my cheeks turn up in excitement. What had she said?
And, well, she said yes. I got a date. Well, I had one, since I'm recording this at night. Skydancer. She's just wonderful. Everything I said she responded to. She makes me laugh. I tell you, she has a mean sense of humor, too. We're meeting again tomorrow night before she heads off to Manhattan on a delivery. Wow. How did she come into my life like that? To just appear from nowhere, help me, and then immediately become so important.
I could believe it. I'd met two mares who had done the same for me. Little Pip and, well, the mare. I really wished I could see her again.
So yeah, times are good. Well, my times are. Equestria-wide, not so much. My old man's not too pleased that I'm still working for the Ministry of Wartime Technology. You know, Ministry Mayor Applejack came to meet us at the new factory yesterday, too. She's incredible, really. Totally on our side, aiming to have us make more armor than weapons, and even hinting that we may get to work on some new project soon. I could have sworn she was a little upset as she spoke of it being made to protect ponies from having to die like... Yeah, I had guessed it was about her brother. Big damn hero, that stallion. But I've signed up to the work. Longer hours, sure. But a higher pay, and I get to protect ponies. These ministries aren't so bad. Really. They do want to help us. I don't believe what they say quietly about them. Although Pinkie Pie is kind of freaky. A little grating to see everywhere you go. She even sent me a personally written birthday card this year. Nice, but, well, weird.
Conflicting reports, but between a lovely young buck in Equestria of old and a borderline psychotic raider trying to drop the habit of anger and killing, I knew who I would trust to believe. I sensed Sundial and I would agree mightily on the merits of being watched forever by Pinkie Pie.
And just to end off, I kinda need this higher pay. I've decided to start saving now. If Skydancer and I become a, thing, well, some pony has to be able to pay for a second stable ticket, right? Okay, night shift time. Wow, I'm properly happy. Hopefully all this war business blows over and Skydancer and I can just spend time. Well, I'll, see you later? Alright, that just sounds weird every time. What should I say, though?
Beats me.
Damn it. I forgot to talk about my cutie mark again. I promise. I'll get to that next time. So yeah, Happy Sundial signing off. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What was that?
My eyes shot upwards. I'd been following Brimstone further down into the complex without even realizing.
Oh, nothing. Just me being weird, I guess.
Brimstone seemed to take that as a satisfactory conclusion.
Oh, wait a moment.
And turned back to what was in front of us. The complex had opened out into a room lit by a single, almost non-functional strobe light above. It was pretty big, stretching perhaps 10 feet upwards and about 15 to the other end, where a huge metallic door was clearly locked shut up a flight of mesh stairs. All around us there were vents on the floor, long since disabled, no doubt. But my eyes were instead drawn to the way it was decorated. Little slips of paper covered the walls and floor. Were they pamphlets? Tribal designs were haphazardly coated on the walls. I recognized them. They were like Brimstone blitzes.
Zebra war paint designs. I chose them to scatter their ponies, but this...
He leaned closer.
It says, the blessed children of the striped way. Well, there's a mouthful. What the hell is this? Zebra cults under Philadelphia?
I honestly hadn't got a clue how to even answer, but even as I stood up, I jumped on hearing a light scuffing nearby. What was that? Where did it come from? I backed off toward the door in fright as my eyes ran from side to side. Where had that noise come from?
Eric, what's wrong?
Something in here. I heard another, and another. Little dry shifts of material on metal. Then clicks. I knew that sound. I'd had enough of them pointed at me over the years to scare me. Safety catches on firearms. Below! Brimstone! Watch out! The vents! I was almost too late. The first vent erupted open in a burst of dry air as a black, white, and rotten figure hauled itself up from the duct beneath it. Ghouls! Brimstone was just adjacent to it. If I hadn't shouted, they may have got him. But, forewarned, his left hind leg lashed out and kicked the vent right back down on its hinges so hard it left a dent as the lid crashed down on the occupant. A sickening crunch of metal colliding with flesh and bone rung out, and the vent slammed shut again with the figure slumping away. It wasn't enough. All around us more were popping up. They weren't zebras! I could see them clearly. Ghoul ponies painted in zebra stripes over their barding and weaponry. Clambering from the holes in an ambush, they completely surrounded us. Behind me I heard a crash, as wall panels ripped out and two more galloped down the hall at me. Hideous, dry war cries filled the chamber. Brimstone either didn't notice or care for all the intimidation as he hurled himself at the nearest ones. One front hoof roughly knocked a pistol from the magical grip of a unicorn, while he threw his entire weight on one that was still trying to get out of the vent. Flattening it, Brimstone's hooves beat the first ghoul's head off the ground twice before a quick twist hurled the unconscious body at his comrades. 3 more fell as they attempted to cluster together for a charge. A shotgun roared. I saw a zebra-colored ghoul collapse against the wall as Brim threw him in the path of the shot. Struggling to sort his aim from the massive recoil, the ghoul was bucked square in the chest into the wall, where he lay silent. There was nothing I could do. I ran. In these places with no way out, I did what I had always done. Found a corner and curled up. Gunfire echoed a dozen times in this small space. How they missed Brimstone was beyond me, or was he just that good that he had known when to dodge behind some wounded ghouls? He was using the cramped arena and their thick numbers against them, even as his colossal size allowed him to simply pound any pony he met into the ground with unyielding force. But that same size was his weakness. It didn't take them long to figure it out before I heard the carefully aimed shotgun blast. I wanted to scream, but as I saw the mighty raider rock to the side and grunt in pain before staggering into the wall, I knew it was over. Blood flowed from his side where buckshot had split open a dozen wounds. The ghoul took aim to finish it. A flare of green magic flew across the chamber, striking the ceiling and lighting everything with a brilliant emerald haze. Under a trickling of molten metal from the searing wound in the roof, the ghouls turned in shock, before backing off immediately. I had just screamed and hit the floor. Whatever that was, it was one intense weapon.
Stay your judgment, my children.
A ghoul, a unicorn buck by the looks of it, bearing black and white robes. Straggly dyed white hair fell in single strands from his head. Held in his magic was an ornate, yet rusted magical energy pistol that looked like it could incinerate a Brahmin in a single shot. As every ghoul in the chamber bowed to him, I galloped over to Brim before realizing. What could I really do? His right foreleg was badly wounded to the point where he could do little but limp. With a snort, he cast me away before pushing himself up, stamping the injured leg a few times and swearing colorfully enough to make me blush. How dare he talk about Luna that way?
Pilgrims, you approach our sanctuary with strange intent. Tell me, do you bear the signs that shall stay our hand? Did those in the station send you?
The ghoul priest, was he? Whatever he was, he moved toward us. I stood between him and Brimstone before realizing how pointless that was. We came to find some things for a friend. Things we were told were here. Anti-rad... Some sort of stuff that helps against rads used in making medicine, and some silver bouncy ball. Yep, definitely a born traitor, Murky. The ghouls hissed to themselves as their leader's eyes narrowed, before trotting around me.
You speak of heretical relics, little one.
He spoke with a raspy voice while waving his glowing horn over me.
It is good you survive, for they have brought us a gifted one. You are blessed.
He must have seen my confused look. Blessed? Clearly he had no idea about my life. But before I could voice my reasons, he continued.
I speak of the gift within you that I can sense, an ever-expanding source of the great striped blessing.
Wait, the striped blessing? Inside me? It took a few seconds, but even my brain began to piece it together. Only for Brimstone to voice it first.
You idiots believe the zebras blessed you with radiation. What a load of...
Yes, warrior. Did we not once worship the sun long ago? The zebras have brought many suns to eradicate the misery we had become in the shadow below the moon of nightmares. In their wake we have been blessed with the purity of the flame, to be converted and blessed for all eternity, that we may continue the work of the striped ones. That was what they gave to us, the will to carry on their mission, even as the world was cast in brightness. You have been chosen, little one, by birth, I sense, not as we were by those who came to this city.
I could see his horn glowing again. He must have had medical training to spot my irradiated infection. Had he been an associate of Weathervane back in Old Equestria if he knew about this place? I glanced at Brimstone to check his condition, but much to my surprise, barring the injury holding him back, the big raider seemed to be fairly calm and conscious. Judging by his scars, I could only assume he had been through worse in life. Look, we can take those heretical things off your hooves. No trouble?
No, they are a reminder of our past, little one. But I do invite you and your partner inside. His markings denote he has a liking to our blessed faith. Perhaps you will learn, as we did, and understand why you are special. But we cannot risk the great deceiver or the bringer of the past to touch the items that would give them power.
The who?
The great deceiver. The one of us who left our cause in early days to commit heresy. To create substances to purge the blessing of the stripes from those who would be its children. Who took our great prophet and leader to hold him in eternal confinement.
Weathervane. They were talking about Dr. Weathervane. Had that crazed ghoul he had locked up been their old leader? Just what had happened over the 2 centuries between these ghouls?
As for the bringer of the past, he is the one who conquered the surface, that place we will one day hope to bring ruin to. That is what we were tasked when they told us, take Philadelphia. We will liberate the blessed from his baleful gaze.
Red-Eye! They were fighting him? That explained the defenses around the crater. It was against ghoul attacks from a hidden lair they hadn't known about.
Now I must ask you to enter. My children here are eager, and do not see the gift within you. Come!
I wasn't sure. These ghouls were insane. Radiation as a blessing, becoming a skinless, rotten, and living corpse was the true way forward? The gift from the zebras. Someone who told them to fight against Equestria? I just wanted to get out of there, but the items we needed were no doubt inside. Besides, looking at the fanatical and heavily armed ghouls, it's not like we had a choice.